Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging SoonerCon. Get ready for the next chapter in Oklahoma's longest running fan run pop culture convention. SoonerCon will be returning in 2024, June 21st through 23rd. Get ready for a weekend of cosplay, fun and excitement, vendors, gaming, and more. You can go to SoonerCon.com for more information. On tap today, we have Donny Phillips. You are one half of the creative team behind a game called Project Blue. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, man.
I'm looking forward to this. I have been having a lot of fun with Project Blue. It is a newer NES game, and that I think that bears a little bit of clarification because when it say it's newer within the past three-ish years or so. And a lot of people don't really realize there have been games made for the NES since the 90s. So I think I should just say this is what you could call a homebrew game that a small team created, and we now have a wide release. And this is not as uncommon as you might think it is.
Yeah, it's actually kind of a very fast growing scene at this point in time. I feel like when Project Blue came out, it was easy to kind of keep abreast of all the different projects in the scene. And in the last 3 years, it's really exploded in a way I can't even keep up with it anymore. Games coming out of left field that I've never even heard of pretty regularly. And yeah, it's great to see so much love for these old systems.
To give it, if I understand correctly, you did your Kickstarter in 2020. Is that right?
I think we might have shipped in 2020. I
Okay.
think the Kickstarter was at the end of 2019.
Yeah, you were saying it was about the past 3 years, and a lot of people were saying that Project Blue was kind of the first instance of a big wide release homebrew game that felt as well fleshed out as some of the classic titles of the way back when. It was like that was the turning point.
Yeah, I took a lot of inspiration from a couple projects that came before me that I feel like definitely laid the groundwork. And I feel like, yeah, Project Blue just happened to come out at the right time, where there was kind of a growing groundswell of interest in the system. And I got lucky to work with Ellen, who's Franken Graphics online, who did all the pixel art. And I think that definitely helped people evaluate our game in a positive way because her art is so fantastic. For my end, I did a lot of work on trying to really emulate the physics of classic NES games, particularly Super Mario Brothers. And one thing I really wanted was to have the feel of the game be very smooth and to have the controls feel really tight. And yeah, I feel like we did a good job with all that, and it definitely helped people evaluate our game positively.
I mean, not to throw any shade on the games that came before that, but just for context, I remember homebrew NES games going back to like 99, 2000, and they were much more in the realm of what you call tech demos or home
Absolutely.
projects, where it's like we were just proud to be able to do this. And I mean all the respect in the world for them because I can't do it. I'll be very honest with you. So, not trying to throw shit, but it's like this was the first time it was like Project Blue came along, a lot of really, really good games came right along with it to join the crowd. And now we have these games coming out like every 3 to 4 months in some cases.
Yeah, I think we just happened to be there at the right place and the right time. And of course, I think the game is good, but I think a lot of it had to do with just kind of riding the coattails of some things that had happened a few years prior. I think Micro Mages came out around that time, a little before us, because I remember that we used their Kickstarter campaign kind of as a, um, a blueprint for ours in a way. Wanted to kind of copy their success as much as we could. Um, but yeah, my attempt with this game was to have it feel like one of the early NES titles. I think I first encountered an NES probably around 1987 or so. So I was trying to make a game that would kind of have the same feel as Kid Icarus, Metroid, and kind of that early batch of games.
Mm-hmm.
So without getting too crazy into the tech stuff, which I think a lot of people do, we just tried to keep the game itself very simple um, and yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with its popularity because a lot of games from that time period are very simple, and you can give a controller to a 5-year old and they'll figure out how to play on their own without any help, and that's really satisfying to see for me because I was that 5-year old kid at one point in time, and when I play modern games, I'm often very overwhelmed by the number of choices and things that can be done, um, and I feel like I end up just not really fully enjoying the games on newer consoles as much. The indie games I enjoy, but the AAA games, they're just a little too much for me at this point. So I just kind of wanted to bring back some of that joy and simplicity of gaming that I feel like was really well encapsulated in the games from my youth.
If I were to describe the game, I would say it's a platformer, a sci-fi based platformer. The mechanics of it are very much, in my mind, in the realm of Mega Man, with a
Mm-hmm.
little Super Mario Brothers control issues thrown in there. And if anybody's familiar with the game Amagon, I would also say it's got some of that feel too. Amagon is not a really well remembered game, so I don't want to. I like it personally, so for me it's a compliment. But for coming from somebody else, it might not be.
I've actually never heard of that game. Um, yeah, there's a fair amount of I mean, it draws a lot of comparisons to Mega Man, and I see why, because your character is dressed in blue, you're fighting against robots, you shoot projectiles that seem to come out of nowhere in a straight line, much as Mega Man does. To be honest, all of that stuff is kind of coincidental. I never played Mega Man as a child. I have played it now, but we had a very small library of NES games when I was a kid. Um, so a lot of that stuff is kind of coincidental. It's definitely mostly based on Super Mario Brothers or even the original Mario Brothers before it
Mhm.
was Super Mario.
That makes a lot of sense.
And a lot of people might not be familiar with that game. I'm not sure. It's single screen. There's no scrolling like in Project Blue, and so that's one of the reasons we used it as kind of a template. And the physics are very much based in Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers.
Hmm.
And what that means is when you're running faster, you can jump higher. Your character has acceleration, so it takes a little bit for your character to start running at full speed, as opposed to something like Mega Man, where when you press right or left, Mega Man immediately starts moving at full speed in that direction. And when you take your finger off the controls, immediately stops moving. Whereas Mario, when you take your fingers off the controls, he kind of slides for a little bit. It's a little slippery with the controls, and that's the acceleration. So yeah, mechanically it is very similar to Super Mario Brothers, but the comparison to Mega Man also makes a lot of sense just with the set and the setting. And I like to say that he shoots like Mega Man, moves like Mario. He's smaller than both of them, so he's harder to hit. He's very fast. He's faster than Mega Man, a little bit slower than Mario because there's no scrolling, so can't go too fast.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's very much in the vein of those two characters for sure.
Yeah, that's a good summary there. And I would ask, which person on the team was a huge RoboCop fan?
Definitely me. I'm not sure
Okay.
about Ellen, but I think she probably is as well. We've had a lot of conversations about the various cyberpunk and dreampunk uh, titles that were, you know, influential on us, and to be sure, a lot of those '80s sci-fi, cyberpunk stuff definitely falls into that category. For the opening scene, for example, when you turn the game on and there's the press start screen, the title screen.
Mhm.
I sent Ellen a picture of still from the movie Alien, at the beginning of the movie where they're all kind of in their life pods and being woken up, and it's like let's have him, in something like this. And so she's like, oh, that's one of my favorite movies. And I started really kind of hitting it off. For my part, I'm a huge Terminator fan. That was my favorite movie when I was a little kid, which was maybe a little inappropriate for a young child, but that's how the 80s were.
I
um
saw RoboCop for the first time at 9, so
oh, I mean,
yeah.
I had this same exact conversation yesterday. So I was at the Portland Retro Game Expo, and someone was saying, I can't believe that RoboCop became a children's cartoon. That's actually really absurd to
Mhm.
think about. Because I went back to watch it in my early 30s and was like, oh my god, this is so violent and over the top. Um, but yeah, no, it's a huge influence on me for sure. I love Paul Verhoeven, the director of that movie in general. If people aren't familiar, he's also the director of Starship Troopers and Total Recall, which are both sci-fi classics. And if you're into schlock, he also directed Showgirls.
Verhoeven loves comic books in general. He loves the medium. So when he makes a movie, you can feel that influence in there for the best of reasons.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, Total Recall was definitely one of my favorite movies as a kid as well. It's just so bizarre and out there.
mhm. uh, when I'm looking through the manual of this game and I'm looking at the design and the themes, and I'm like, yeah, this really feels like somebody wanted to take RoboCop and make it cute and succeeded, but
So the manual is actually by a guy named MT, and he did the box art. We hired him to do the box art, but we ended up having him do all the text in the manual as well. So that's all written by him, based on conversations that we all had together. So it's also very possible that he is a large RoboCop fan. I'm not sure, but definitely there's a kind of a critique of mega corporation capitalist society in there for sure, which I think is also exists in RoboCop and many cyberpunk uh, titles.
it's almost baked into the formula. And from what you're
Yeah.
telling me, with you guys all sitting around having a conversation about what the game should be and the themes, it's like this feels like one of the better ways that the older games came together. That it was a small team who really cared about it, who
Yes.
had enough time to let the project fully cook before they released it.
Yeah. One thing that I really focused on a lot, well, didn't focus on a lot more accurately, is saying, like um we don't want to be defining anything that doesn't need to be defined in this world. And so my way of thinking about that is kind of influenced by a blog post that Ellen wrote at one point in time where she was talking about how great the first Alien movie is and how kind of lifeless the newer, yeah, they're all right, the newer movies in that franchise are. And part of it for us, at least, is that in Alien, the whole thing is a mystery, right? You have no idea what's going on, and everything's very hard to define and understand. And once you have those worlds and you want to like kind of define everything and like, oh, where does this come from? And how did this work? And this works and this works. The honest reality, for me at least, is that usually the mystery is a lot more interesting, exciting than the explanation of the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, as much as you can keep things kind of mysterious and vague, you're leaving a space for the viewer to fill in the blanks themselves, and that can be a very interesting process. So, for example, like the second level of our game is titled the D Zone, and it is, just kind of this mass of destroyed and dilapidated buildings. There's no lore in our universe for why that area is the way that it is. That's just what we've done. And yeah, and that lets the viewer kind of fill in the blanks themselves and kind of imagine where uh what's going on. And any explanation that we could give would at best match a person's imagination, but at worst would take away from the mystery and the intrigue, I think. So yeah, we've definitely just tried to keep things super vague. And I think that's, if I'm thinking about my favorite cyberpunk titles, they all kind of have that in common. Blade Runner, The Matrix, stuff like that. It can be very hard to define exactly what the hell is going on in these worlds.
And when you have a formula that works, you have a Matrix, a RoboCop, a Terminator, whatever. When you have something, you suddenly people love it. They want more of it, and that's natural. That's good. But you just have the same conflict you just mentioned, that like if I give you too much, you won't like it as much anymore.
Yeah, Terminator is a great example of that. I mean, Terminator 1, Terminator 2, in my opinion, two of the best movies ever made. Um, Terminator 2 basically laid the groundwork for the modern blockbuster, right? I mean, you try to find something that exists like that before it, you're not going to be very successful. And yeah, and it's hard to put your finger on what kind of sucks about Terminator 3, Terminator Salvation. I haven't even seen anything past that because I just don't even care anymore. But I'm like watching previews for one of the new ones, and it's like, well, what if John Connor was actually a robot? And it's just like, you're trying too hard to come up with a twist and a thing, and it just is not. I don't know. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me.
So I was having a conversation with somebody who was a big fan of this and is a little bit older than I am, so this was very relevant. She had seen the original Terminator 2 when it first came out, like immediately, like within a day or two of its release. And we know now that the big twist is that Arnold plays the hero in this movie, whereas he played the villain in the previous movie.
Mm-hmm.
And what was explained to me that I did not get, and I've never gotten, is that because of the way the marketing for the movie really pushed that, and if you didn't listen to it, if you didn't know about that, when you start the movie, you're
Yes.
told that two robots are going after this child, and you don't know which one you're supposed to root for.
They're both kind of feeling bad at the beginning, for
Yes.
sure. It was entertaining to watch Arnold, wreck a biker bar, but it's definitely doesn't not feel like a good guy at that point in time. It's true.
No. And obviously he was the villain in the first, so you're kind of led in that direction. And then the actual villain dresses up as a police officer, which is kind of an ironic twist to kind of throw you off just a little bit more. You don't know until he turns to take the bullet for John that he is the good guy. That is the moment you really get the reveal that is lost if you listen to any commercials whatsoever.
I know it's really weird how they made the movie that way, and then they did the marketing such that you could tell. And I grew up in a very small area, so I didn't get to go to the movies a whole lot as a kid. So by the time I got to see Terminator 2, I had been well and truly spoiled that Arnold was the good guy for me. But yeah, I find that those two movies are just so great when I go back to them still to this day. It's interesting to me, Arnold was actually supposed to be the good guy in the first movie. And then he met up with James Cameron and was telling James Cameron, oh, the guy who plays the robot, he's got to be like this, he's got to be like that, he's got to move this way. And as James Cameron is listening, he's like, oh, maybe you need to play the robot. So I liked that a lot. Yeah.
And as for filling in the details, that is something I'm sure all of us did, but I know I especially, when I look back at the original Super Mario Brothers or Super Mario 2 or 3 or the earlier I look at what we call the simple graphics, and I just think, no, they were effective graphics. They gave you just
Yes.
enough detail that you could make that world in your head, but you didn't get so much detail that you didn't have to do any work. And you had such these large plans of what that must look like in the real world.
I mean, I feel like Super Mario Brothers looks simple by today's standards, but in 1986 or 87, it was downright psychedelic. And particularly Super Mario 3 was just like what is even happening here? You know, just so creative with the world. And I think people have a tendency to just kind of accept that, oh yeah, he just made this thing, it's super simple. But when you think about that world, it's actually so strange. You're collecting mushrooms and fire, you know, it's like a very weird cartoony existence. I think that Nintendo does a really, really great job of making things that have a bright aesthetic and can appeal to people all ages in a really beautiful way. And the original Super Mario's are a great example of that. Legend of Zelda is a great example of that. The Zelda series in general, you know, is kind of a perfect encapsulation of that. Doesn't need to be a game about space marines killing demons in order to be fun or interesting, you know. And that's not meant as a knock on Doom, which is a game that I also really loved when it came out. But you know, I think that there's this since Doom came out and Wolfenstein 3D, that there's kind of been a very, you know, inexorable march towards making things hardcore and badass. And like, don't get me wrong, I love Fallout, I love some of these games, but I think that there's something really special about the way that Nintendo is able to create these really beautiful worlds that are just weird and fun. And I don't know, yeah, it's really special to me, honestly.
Zelda is a really great example because you can see with that series as it progresses that Nintendo would take tiptoes in the direction of going towards something a little more realistic, a little more detailed, a little more fleshed out, and then realize we can only take this so far before we have to bounce back into the bright, happy, fantasy based. Like even with Zelda 2, it's like, okay, well, we can make it, you know, we can have both a side scroller and a top down view, and we can add more realistic for the time graphics and mechanics, and that was great, but fans wanted more of what the original was, so we go back in that direction. And then
Absolutely.
Ocarina of Time comes back, and it's like, well, now we can make 3D, and we can again increase the fight dynamics, and let's only take that so far.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you keep the childlike joy, you know, intact with a game like that. And if you try to remove it, then it's, you know, what is it, you know? It's just a really important part of the formula, I think. At one point in time, I did find a batch of files online that were the original documents for Legend of Zelda. It was like Miyamoto got together with whoever else was on the design team, and they mapped the whole thing out on graph paper. Oh, it's really fascinating to me to look at the game development from, you know, that era and seeing how people actually worked on stuff, as they were quite impressive people to make it work, honestly, as well as it did.
So you mentioned you were at PRGE not too long, a couple days ago, actually. Just
Yesterday.
getting back. Yeah. That is one that I have wanted to hit for so long. I've heard nothing but great things about it. How did it go for you?
Oh, went pretty well. I've been going. I think the first year I went and actually had a booth of my own was 2019, and we were getting the Kickstarter set up at that point in time. And then of course COVID happened, so did 2019, 2022, and 2023 I've done there. And it's really great experience for me personally because as a programmer, you might assume, and you'd be right, that I'm kind of a hermit. I don't spend a whole lot of time going out into the world and making people play my game. So just having a huge crowd of people who are interested in what I'm doing and excited about what I'm doing, you know, really is gives me a lot of inspiration to keep working on NES projects, which, as you might imagine, is not the most financially lucrative path to take in life. So it's kind of necessary to have a level of feedback from people around you in order to want to keep doing it, right? And at PRGE, it's great because you can see, all these young kids will pick the game up and just get hooked on it immediately. And yeah, it's just a really great experience to share it with people and to be able to watch them play it and enjoy it, which is not something I get to do very often.
I've been to a bunch of retro gaming conventions, but not PRGE. And I keep hearing that this is kind of the convention people go to when they're really still into just the love of the hobby and they're not really getting into the collecting and flipping aspects so much. It's really about just the experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a huge collector community there for sure, but it also is just, I feel like it's probably the largest retro game expo in America. I bring 10,000 plus people in, and they have all sorts of stuff going on. There's the Tetris World Championships were happening yesterday, and it's pretty funny. I wandered over there. It's like a bunch of 15-year-old kids now playing Tetris on the NES, and it's kind of wild to see that it still has such a following. But yeah, it's the sort of thing where you could definitely just kind of casually have an interest in retro gaming in general and really find a lot of stuff to do there. They have a huge open arcade and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of fun. I often don't get to really interact with all of that because I'm at my booth and talking to people about my game. But yeah, yesterday I actually found, in terms of people who are into collecting, I actually found the first computer that I ever owned was there. It's obviously the same exact one, but the model that we had. And yeah, just all these great, working systems from the 80s that people have got up and running, old Apple computers from that time period,
Wow.
So there's a bunch of really cool stuff there. That's, even if you're not a collector and you're not trying to, spend $400 on a computer from the 80s, like, it's still really cool to see. And they have, various groups of game developers who come in and just have their games on display, and me being one of them. But, also there's like the whole Atari age contingent was there. And I guess Atari, the company, I didn't know this until yesterday, Atari, the company, bought Atari Age, the website.
That is true. Yes, they did.
Yeah. And so they were there as Atari Age. They had a huge booth set up with all the games that people, all the homebrews that people are making for Atari and stuff these days. So that was cool to see. And they're there with their new system as well and trying to promote that. And I don't know, just in general, it's a great way to kind of keep on top of the scene in general and what's happening, basically,
I
see who's working on new projects and so on and so forth.
and for me, that's what it's always been about, is just seeing the giving people the platform to put out their projects, get them in front of an audience, put it in their hands. You get a chance to actually sign your cartridge if somebody wants that.
Mm-hmm.
When you see those kids there playing Tetris at 15 years old, realizing that when they were born, the current system was like the Xbox 360, is this? Do you really feel like they're really getting into it just as much as we did? They're having the same experience, or is this something different for them?
Well, I mean, I think it's, in many ways they're into it even deeper than we were when we were young,
Cool.
because like, when I was a teenager in the 1990s. I still had my NES in the late 90s. I used to play Tetris a lot. I was very good. Like, people would come over to my house to watch me play Tetris. And we used to have conversations like, oh, am I the best Tetris player in the world? Oh, there's got to be someone better than me, And I ended up looking it up years later, what were the high scores around that time period. And I would have been not the top player, but top 10, top 20, somewhere in there if I had been submitting my scores And and today I would be like top 1,000, maybe top 10,000, somewhere in there, because there's all these kids who are just unbelievable, and they have I mean, for me, I guess I would say it's that they're almost more into it than we were, because they have to go out and find a CRT, and you know what I mean? They need to like actually get all of these components together that are not easy to find anymore. All to play a 40-year-old version of Tetris, 35-year-old version of Tetris, right? Like it's just a little it's fascinating. And then they're traveling to Oregon to compete against other people, which, you know, I never would have even thought about doing as a kid. I don't know that that even existed, but it definitely would not have been something that was possible for me to do. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of exciting for me just to see people just, you know, still getting joy out of these old systems. And to me, Tetris is one of the most just like almost a meditative experience in a way. It's it's one of those games that when you play it for an hour and you try to go to sleep that night, you're playing Tetris in your head. Do you know what I mean? It's just it's an amazing game, honestly, when you consider what it's made out of, what its requisite components are, you know. It's, you know, graphically it's garbage. You could make it with X's and O's if you wanted to. It's like a definition of simplicity in a way. I love the fact that, you know, that all the blocks have 4 squares to them, and it's all the different arrangements that you could make out of 4 squares. You know, it's just such a simple system that's so well designed.
When you play Tetris and you're trying to land those blocks, no matter what the screen looks like, no matter what the arrangement is, there's really about 3 different moves you can make over and over, and you have to decide in a tenth of a second which one you want to do in that moment. And for me, doing that a couple thousand times in a row over the course of 5 minutes gets very relaxing. And people say it makes them nervous. Like, no, it's like the same 3 moves over and over. And that will calm me down if I'm not feeling good. I tell you, it really does.
I was watching a video many years ago when I first became aware that people were doing Tetris competitively. The guy who was world championship for a long time, Jonas Newberger or something like that, actually died suddenly a couple years ago, but he was the world champion every year for many years. And I was watching this video where he was explaining Tetris, and one of the things that he said that always stuck with me is, you know, people will say, oh, we got to fit all this stuff into my garage, we got to Tetris it. You know, so we got to rearrange everything so that it fits. And he's like, that's not Tetris. Tetris is doing that fast. Like, it's not about how much stuff you can fit into one space. It's about how fast you can do that. And I just thought that was really funny, because it's true. It's all just about the immediacy of it.
Yeah, Tetris strategy is kind of a misnomer, because for the most part, you can't set up a play in Tetris. You have to respond to a play.
Yeah, you're dealing with the RNG. It's all random. And particularly Nintendo Tetris. I understand the newer versions are like, you're guaranteed to get a straight line every so often or whatever, which kind of takes away from the complexity of the situation, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to essential games, I want to put Project Blue in that list of games that anybody who's playing an NES probably should have in their collection. It's really worth your time. And if you don't have an NES, it's available on, I know, the Switch and the Xbox. Is it on PS4 and Steam?
We're hoping to make that happen. There's no promises yet, but basically we have have partnered with a publisher to do the Xbox and the Switch versions. And so what those are is basically just the game Project Blue kind of embedded inside of an emulator that then plays on either the Xbox or the Switch, respectively. And I just think they were not quite prepared to do the PS5 version, but I think that they have that kind of in the pipeline. It's something that we're hoping to make happen. I can't promise it, but both the Steam edition and the PS5 are hopefully coming in the future. As far as Steam goes, in my opinion, you might even be better off, honestly, just buying the NES ROM file and running it in an emulator on your computer, because that's what it's going to be anyway at the end of the day. I'm not going to rewrite all the code to run on a PC. There's just no point. So yeah, I think that might actually be very equivalent to the Steam release for people who are, technically capable of running it in an emulator, which realistically anybody should be able to do. It's not hard. And those emulators, they often have, if you get a good one like Messen, it'll add actually features to the game which can be useful. So you can, for example, create a save state in Messen. And probably the biggest complaint I get about Project Blue from people is that there's no way to save your progress in the game. If you turn your game off, you got to start over from level 1. What I always say to those people is that, this game is modeled after games that work that way. And it's that way for a reason. It's part of the game design. I understand why you feel like it shouldn't be, but at the end of the day, the idea is that you play the game, you get as far as you can. Eventually, you get to a place that's very hard. You get frustrated, turn this machine off. You go do something else for a while. Come back a day later, you try again. You start at scratch, and you say, right from the beginning, you'll notice you've gained a lot of skill from your last play session. And the second time you play it, you'll be able to get further. And that's how Super Mario 3 worked. That's how Super Mario 1 worked. You had to painstakingly make these improvements in the game. And for me personally, the way that the game was designed was to reward that sort of play style. So if you ever played a game like Sonic 2 is a great example, where the first time you play through an area, you're kind of plotting and looking at all the stuff and trying to figure out where to go and very slowly avoiding the enemies and everything. When you're playing Sonic 2 for the 10th time, you get to the first level of the game, with any luck, you're just pressing the button to the right and holding it there and jumping when you need to. And it's this very satisfying experience of racing through a level. And for me personally, that's very rewarding. And so Project Blue is kind of designed that same way, where at first you might have to really take your time and be careful. When I'm playing Project Blue, I'm sprinting through everything all the time, pretty much nonstop. And, if I have to take damage to get past an area, I just do, because I know where the hearts are. I know where to collect and get more life. And, I think a well-designed platformer has that feel to it, where you can really, once you get the feel of the game, it clicks for you, and you can really just kind of be rewarded for that in being able to run through these levels at top speed. One of our play testers is a speedrunner. So one of the guys who was testing the game for us was ridiculously good at all of this sort of stuff. And last I checked, he did have the world record for the fastest Project Blue victory out there. Yeah, he can beat it way faster than I can.
Well, I'm just getting my toes wet in the game now. I'm just starting to get through the first couple stages, and I personally would say, yeah, I see where this is going here. I do see myself getting a little bit better each time, and that is really rewarding. It's a game where I feel like when I lose, there's a reasonable chance I can go back and try again. There's never a cheap death. It's just a death I have to learn from.
Yeah, and that's definitely one way that I try to definitely one way in which I would say our level design is very different from a game like Battle Kid, for example, where I've never played Battle Kid, but I've watched some videos of people getting very angry at it, where it definitely feels like sometimes there's just a little thing that's going to trick you at the beginning of a place and kill you. And then you have to know that that's there. And I try to avoid that. I try to make it like if you die, it's because you failed to account for something. It's because you failed to, press the button at the right time.
Yeah.
Not because something hidden out of nowhere jumps out of the bushes and kills you.
Yeah, that's the area where it definitely succeeds the most at, and it's a very successful game. So people are going to pick it up, and the digital shop of their choice, provided they have the right platform. And can they still get a physical cartridge?
We do have physical cartridges online. I have a Big Cartel site. It's projectblue.bigcartel. You can get it there. But there's also, we've got some publishers. So if you're not in America, you'd probably be better off buying it from a company called Broke Studio. It's brokestudio.fr is their website. And they are based in France, and they have a pretty good collection of games, actually. The company was founded by the guy who did Twin Dragons. And they also have, I believe they have Nebs and Debs, which is a great homebrew, and they have Micro Mages and some other stuff that I'm not as familiar with because I have a hard time keeping up with the scene, as I mentioned earlier. But all those are kind of early titles that were inspirational to me, and they're all available on that website as well. And then in America, there's also Mega Cat Studios has copies of the game. So we got a few different publishers. Yeah, and we also have a Famicom release as well. It's done by First Press Games. Yeah.
So I'm going to make sure all that gets into the show notes on my website, aaronbossig.com. Where can people follow your adventures and the adventures of your team on the web?
The best place to follow us is actually to follow Ellen, my graphics artist. She did all the pixel art in Project Blue. Her online handle is Franken Graphics, Franken, as in Frankenstein, Franken Graphics. And she has a Twitter account. It's probably the best place to see where her and I are working on new stuff. I also, have a Twitter account, but I don't really use it. So I probably will be mainly doing promotion through the artists that I'm working with, because when someone posts a beautiful new pixel art piece to the web, it often gets a lot of engagement, and that gives you followers and lets more people see your stuff. And as a programmer, when you post, oh hey guys, I just optimized the collision routine, no one really cares. And it's very hard to get engagement on that sort of post. So it's kind of frustrating as a programmer sometimes, because when you're working on a new project, you can't really brag about it too much, because there's not that much exciting about the work that you're doing for people who aren't programmers. So yeah, I'm working with Ellen on a new game, but it's several years off. And I'm also working with an artist named Mugi, Mugi, on a game right now as well. So you could follow him on Twitter. And that's the guy who's behind Dimension Shift. If people are familiar with that, probably most listeners probably aren't, but that was an NES homebrew that never actually got released, but had a very promising demo at one point in time that had people very excited. And so he's got great art as well, and we're working on a kind of Shatterhand type game.
Cool. Okay. Well, Donny, thank you so much for doing this. I would be glad to have you back anytime, and I suggest everybody follow you and your team, because this game is worth keeping your eyes on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. Have a good day.
You too.